Implement Act of 2008. Consistent methodology to allocate operating and capital costs associated with Amtrak corridor services has been implemented, and a methodology to allocate costs among all the users of the Northeast Corridor is in the process of being implemented. As a result of these changes, this year Amtrak will receive $286.6 million from 18 states and approximately $119 million from commuter authorities. But in one respect, our approach to intercity passenger rail service has been scattershot. Over $10 billion was appropriated by ARA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, during the fiscal year of 2010 to fund conventional and high-speed passenger rail projects. But rather than investing these funds strategically to achieve specific outcomes, the previous administration distributed the funds widely, making about 150 grants to 34 states, the District of Columbia, and Amtrak. The result is most of the improvement made across the country has been incremental at best. And further, about $1 billion of the $8 billion in ARA funds has not been spent and will be turned back to the Treasury in September. Particularly concerning to me is that nearly $4 billion of the funding was dedicated to California high-speed rail, which has seen skyrocketing costs. At the same time, the scope of the project has diminished. What was sold to the voters is a $33 billion project that would connect all of California's major cities by 2020 is now a $64 billion project without connections to Sacramento and San Diego, with an optimistic completion date of 2029 and blended service over commuter rail at both ends of the line. The initial operating segment alone, extending from San Jose to a north point somewhere north of Bakersfield, will cost over $20 billion. Other members of the subcommittee may also have concerns about the projects selected to receive ARA funding. Given the limited federal dollars available for intercity passenger rail projects, it's imperative that projects be better prioritized to accomplish specific national goals. This hearing is also about understanding new technologies that will transform our passenger rail network. As an example, a number of members of this committee have experienced high-speed trains in Europe and Asia and alternative technologies such as maglev. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and look forward to a lively discussion. I now recognize the first of all, on page 13 of your 2016 business plan, it states, and I quote, since the inception of planning for high-speed rail in California, it's been assumed that the program would be funded with federal funds, state funds, and private sector investment, each at approximately one-third. Are you still confident we're at a third, and a third?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your remarks. And I guess I would have to say honestly that I don't think there's any question about the state's share of this reaching roughly a third of the cost. Our analyses show that the potential revenues that would generate private sector investment would equal about a third of the cost. As we sit here today, Mr. Chairman, I think the question for us is the federal participation. Right now, of the $64 billion, the federal commitment is about $3.5 billion, representing 5% share of federal support for this project. And I would submit to you that that is far lower than historically has been the case. California has committed both bond money, state cap and trade money. Those programs are moving forward. We see $20 billion of private sector investment. That's about a third. And I would hope, Mr. Chairman, that as this Congress and the administration sees the private sector and the state contributions to this, that we can have a different conversation about the federal support than we've had in the past few years. So my confidence level depends on that.
And so far, the amount of expenditures that you've had so far has been primarily federal dollars.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the fact that the Department of Transportation, through the tapered match approach, has allowed us to get going on this program when there was, in the past, some litigation and other challenges. We are on the threshold of completing the expenditure of the ARA money. Further federal money for us under the FY10 grant will have to wait under the terms of the agreement until California reaches its match. We have started to do that, and we see that moving forward appropriately.
And our previous hearing, from memory, our previous hearing last year, you had stated that you would not need any more federal dollars under the initial construction segment. Is that still correct?
That is still correct, Mr. Chairman.
But you are still counting on federal government to come up with roughly $20 billion of the $64 billion needed for Phase 1.
I would say the right verb there is we're hoping for it. I don't know that we're counting on it as we sit here today. And the import of that will simply be that if the federal government does not provide additional support, it will certainly slow the development of the program. I think it's important to note that we have designed our program to be delivered in segments. Each segment will have utility, and as we complete each segment, the risk goes down. So my hope is that the federal government would look at areas where there are gaps to fill in or other things like that, and I think we can have that conversation at that point.
The California High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group concluded last year that even using the California High-Speed Rail authorities, using your own assumptions, Phase 1 still faces an $18.9 billion funding shortfall. Can you briefly describe, in the short amount of time we have left, what revenue sources are you counting on to fill that gap?
Well, again, I think the biggest part of that is I think they assumed that there was not necessarily going to be additional federal support at this point, so federal dollars could be a source of that. Mr. Chairman, we're also starting to look at a number of ancillary revenue opportunities. Initial estimates really didn't account for what it takes to build this on the ground and protect communities and ag land, but I think we've now absorbed those costs. And in fact, we're doing extensive and aggressive value engineering. 2 years ago, the cost estimate was $68 billion. We brought it down to $64. We're continuing to look at ways that we can drive costs down because we know we will have construction cost pressures.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some days I actually get back on time, so appreciate it. The forbearance. We did have a markup on strategic arms and nuclear weapons and all of that, but here we are. And something that is critically important to California and I think to the nation, and that's the high-speed rail system in California. Mr. Richards, my apologies for missing your testimony, although I was able to read it. Just a quick question to you about the new project going forward. The President talks about making it in America, a subject matter that I've been banging away on for the 7 years that I've been here. And I'm delighted to find myself in agreement with the President on at least one issue, that is that we ought to make things in America. Could you please tell us about the new train sets that are coming on, the attitude of the Commission with regard to this very important policy of enhancing American manufacturing by buying America?
First of all, Congressman Garamendi, I want to recognize your leadership on this issue. You and I have had a number of conversations on this, and you have emphasized, as I think many of your colleagues would want you to, the importance of making sure that these dollars that are ultimately coming from taxpayers, federal or state, go to create American jobs. We envision, unfortunately today, there are no domestic manufacturers, no American companies that are in the business of manufacturing high-speed rail trains. We hope that that will change, and I think, as you have indicated many times, we can provide a role in creating a whole new manufacturing base in the United States, and these are very high technology systems, and so these are prevalent, very high-paying, high-tech jobs. Our view is that, well, first of all, we will respect the Buy America provisions that are in the law. That means that we have to do everything possible to make sure that the equipment and the components are manufactured in this country. As I've committed to you, and I commit here today to your colleagues, we will not seek waivers from those provisions unless we get to the most extraordinary circumstance that we have plumbed the depths throughout our economy to create these components here. In California right now, Siemens, the German company, has a manufacturing plant in Sacramento. They are very interested in manufacturing high-speed trains with American workers. Kawasaki has a manufacturing plant in Lincoln, Nebraska. They are very interested in manufacturing trains with American workers. And any other entity that would come to participate in our program is going to need to come and show that they are either presently have the capacity to build these trains in the United States or that they will create the capacity to build it here.
There are many other elements in this system: concrete, steel, bridges, et cetera. Could you speak to that?
I'm proud to say that today, as we sit here, and it's our intention that this will continue to be the case, every ounce of concrete, every ounce of steel is domestic. The steel girders are being manufactured in Lathrop, California. The steel rebar is manufactured in Southern California. We continue to use 100% domestic content for the construction materials.
Did you say Lathrop?
I did. I believe you're familiar with that community, Mr. Chairman.
Lathrop. I think I know that city. And I know you do also, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you very much. Just a final point of my own. It was 1988 when California established the High-Speed Rail Commission. Congressman Costa and I were the authors of that legislation. We've been at this a long time. The Buy America provisions are extraordinarily important for the continuation of support for this project. American taxpayer dollars and both California taxpayer dollars as well are the way in which this is going to be initially financed. And to maintain that support, the Buy America provisions maximum, I'd love to see 100%. And as I told you, Mr. Richards, we will never build a high-speed train in America unless the High-Speed Rail Authority in California simply says it will be American-made, in which case this industry will move to America and it will be built in America, and we can then capture both the technology, the jobs, and the future. And so I appreciate your position on this. I hope it is maintained. And needless to say, I'm sure this committee will watch closely because Lathrop is an extremely important community in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Just a point of clarification to Mr. Garamendi's question. California High-Speed Rail did apply for a waiver in 2014 on Buy America provision, did it not?
It did, and actually there was a further one, and I worked with Mr. Garamendi and reversed that decision to seek a waiver at that time. And part of, I think, the issue there was that we were working with Amtrak at one point, and Amtrak had followed a protocol. Some of our staff people thought that that meant that we could kind of skip over some steps. My commitment to Congressman Garamendi and to also the members of this committee and the Congress is that in the future we will not seek any waiver prior to going out into the marketplace aggressively looking for systems and components, and only after we've plumbed all those depths would we begin to discuss that.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Richard, one of the focus of today's hearing is private investment in intercity passenger rail service. The Florida and Texas projects, for example, are funded entirely through the private sector. In California, where the high-speed rail project has been in development for an extended period of time, how much funding has been pledged or invested so far?
We have not been at the point of seeking or receiving private sector investment so far, Mr. Chairman, at this point. That's not to say that there's not overwhelming interest, but it would come in at a different phase in the project.
Well, let me then ask you about the interest. At our January 15, 2014 oversight hearing on California high-speed rail, you had indicated that private sector investment was imminent. And in quote, you said, in 2011, the authority issued a report for expressions of interest, the RFEIs, and received more than 1,100 responses. Those 1,100 responses, are those in the areas of selling right-of-way, station development, fiber optics, real estate development, air rights, all in that type of
I don't remember specifically, but I think that's right. And then there was another round where we went out to the private sector. We got very specifically about 36 responses to our question about how to finance the next phase of the project. But if I might, just two quick points. First of all, we applaud the success of both Texas and Florida and what they're doing. Their structures are different than ours. In some cases, they're operating on existing railway corridors. In some cases, there's an existing railway. Also, there was a deliberate decision made by my predecessors, and I think even your predecessors in the California legislature, that this program should try to connect areas of the state, including the Central Valley, which has been underinvested. That's different than building a straight line from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And what that has meant, since we are also by law not allowed to provide an operating subsidy, what that's meant is that for the private sector to come in, either the government has to guarantee their first period losses, which we cannot do by law, or we have to show them that there is sufficient ridership that they will make that investment on a risk-adjusted basis. And that is why our view is that the government has to pay for the first operating segment. We will then auction the rights to the private sector to come in and operate on that segment. So it's in sequence, and I think we're on path for that to happen.
I've got specific questions on the ridership side of things and the
Sure.
private investors as it pertains to either direct money into the project or from buying the train sets themselves.
Right.
But specifically on the redevelopment of real estate or selling of right-of-way for whatever purpose, whether that's development or fiber optics or signage or what have you, do you have estimates on what all of the different developments from LA to San Francisco and the right-of-way that's being purchased, estimates on what that value is that could be generated from just that aspect of the business?
I don't have that at this time, Mr. Chairman. We're just really starting to get into that. So my answer is I do not have that at this time.
Okay, but you had 1,100 responses. Those 1,100 responses were pertaining to what?
Mr. Chairman, I have to say I don't recall at this point. I'd like to be able to supplement my testimony with that.
Okay. We're just looking for
I understand.
ideas and better understanding of how we put this, these numbers together. Well, let me finish that quote from that hearing. Following up on the results of the RFEI in January 2012, the authority met with 8 infrastructure investment firms which confirmed their interest in investing in the program. What has happened since 2012? It's been 5 years since you made that statement. I assume, well, let me ask you, the 8 infrastructure investment firms, was that pertaining to buying the trains themselves? Was it capital infusion? Was it going into the infrastructure of rail? And what has happened with those 8 companies?
I was in many of those meetings, Mr. Chairman. It was really about, at that point, looking at the question of infusion of capital. And actually, it was my idea to say, we need to go out and take snapshots of the market from time to time and find out where we are and what we need to do. Subsequent to that, in 2012, probably the one thing that sort of disrupted our development was adverse court rulings in 2013. Adverse court rulings in 2013 that basically put the project on hold. Those ultimately were reversed, and in fact, all the other court rulings have gone our way since then. There were questions about the extension of the cap-and-trade program, which are being resolved, issues about our bonds, which are being resolved, and so now we're back at the point of talking to the private sector about when and how they want to come in. But that's why I want to reemphasize our action last week to issue an RFP for early operator. These would be operating companies that would come into the program now, help us design the program, be available to start up the program, absorb those early losses, and we got very strong indications from 5 international consortia, all of whom want to compete for that. I think that's a very good indicator that we're now moving into a commercial phase and about to enter into those conversations with the private sector.
Thank you. Mr. Richard, the peer review group noted, reviewing the 2016 business plan, that if the quote, "If the initial initial operating segment is completed as planned, the lack of a connection into Bakersfield," you're stopping the first initial segment short of Bakersfield. So if it's not connected with Bakersfield and you don't have a fully functional connection from San Jose to the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco, will that not, those two, limit the ridership numbers and passenger revenue that you're needed to complete the rest of the project and encourage private investment?
They will limit it, Mr. Chairman. I think that the key point here is our 2016 business plan showed that the construction that we are doing in the Central Valley from wherever the terminus is to San Jose by itself would allow us to build something that would be economically self-sustaining, which is both the law and the policy in California. That would be the minimum system that we could build. It would connect the Central Valley to Silicon Valley. There would be enough ridership on that system, even between sort of the Fresno, Merced region and San Jose, to be economically self-sustaining, to not require an operating subsidy.
Have you released those ridership estimates?
They were part of the 2016 business plan. And so, but we also, and the reason we stopped north of Bakersfield is originally we thought we were going to build our first segment to Los Angeles. We changed our direction for reasons I can go into, and so we didn't go any further south, and we turned to go north and west. But we also said, as you point out in the 2016 business plan, that it would make a lot more sense to actually connect into Bakersfield and to enhance the service between San Jose and San Francisco. Even if we could meet the minimum criteria not doing that, it would make more sense to do that. Though that would require an additional $2.9 billion of investment, but it would generate $4.7 billion of additional ridership revenue. So our point was we could have the conversation with the Congress about whether that's an appropriate federal investment given the almost immediate return of doubling that investment and further connecting those regions. So we don't need to connect into Bakersfield right now or enhance the service to San Francisco, but we think it would be better if we could do that. Frankly, the first place we were going to look is here. If that's not satisfactory, we'll start scrounging in the sofa cushions to see how we get there.
And the recent FRA grant for Caltrain electrification, it is my understanding the folks over in that area have made it very, very clear that they will never be high-speed rail, nor do they want to be high-speed rail, and that the Caltrain track will never be upgraded to be able to facilitate the California high-speed rail trains on that piece of track. So it's my understanding that as the blended approach, you would, as you connect with Caltrain eventually, that you would have to get off of California high-speed rail and onto Caltrain.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to respectfully say that I don't think any of that is correct. The folks, you may be talking about people who in the community of Atherton have tried to bring litigation to stop high-speed rail from happening on that corridor. But in fact, all of the transportation leaders in the Bay Area have a very different view. We have a very different view, and in fact, by law, we could not provide the $600 million of bond funding contribution to that unless that corridor will accommodate high-speed rail. We simply couldn't do it. The plan is that the electrification will take place now, which will allow Caltrain to have more efficient service as a standalone thing. But in fact, we save $20 billion by using the Caltrain tracks. There is no appreciable diminution in speed between San Jose and San Francisco on that, and there will have to be some track straightening and some passing tracks. But we're in discussions with Caltrain and other transportation leaders in the Bay Area about precisely how to do that. We're doing environmental work on that right now. So that corridor will be upgraded to high-speed service, and we think that's the most cost-effective way to do it. But I'd be happy to engage with you or your staff about where we're having differences there.
Thank you. I'd like to understand that better, but it is your intention that the Caltrain system will accommodate high-speed rail trains at a certain point in time.
That's correct. And those engineering studies have been done, and that is the plan. The California legislature appropriated our bond money specifically with that idea in mind. And so I'm happy to engage with you and your staff on this further.
And would this be at a later date, or is this part of the FRA grant, that the grant and the Caltrain upgrades are being put in place with the understanding that California high-speed rail trains will be on that track?
Well, my understanding is that the grant, the core capacity grant that they got, which comes through a different part of the Department of Transportation, that grant, I believe, Mr. Nissenbaum can correct me, came out of the Federal Transit Administration, not FRA, and it was intended to be able to support Caltrain electrification as a standalone matter. But we are now working with Caltrain so that and the reason we're funding this is that it will allow us to step up to full high-speed service. But I think that the grant from Federal Transit Administration was independent of that, if I understand that correctly. And
Mr. Nissenbaum?
Yes, that's correct. It's through the Federal Transit Administration, through their capacity investment program.
Okay, so this has been my concern from the initial grant request that came up late January, is that you're using Prop 1A dollars as your state match, yet there has not been any clarification that Caltrain will ever be able to facilitate. Well, let me ask you, under the grant agreement, will Caltrain be able to facilitate California high-speed rail?
So I'm going to have to get back to you because it's FTA-administered grants about how they've written that. From our standpoint, we work closely with FTA to ensure that whatever sources of funding are applied to each grant are uniquely to those grants, that there's no double counting and so forth. So that's our piece of it. But I can certainly get back to you on how it's written from FTA.
But you understand my concern. If Mr. Richard is saying Prop 1A is for California high-speed rail, and you're using California high-speed rail money on a grant match for an upgrade to Caltrain, I want to make sure that we are not going to build a new track and upgrade a track only to have to turn back around and you find other money to upgrade it again, assuming we're going to have Caltrain, California high-speed rail on there. If you could clarify that position, we would look forward to a written response on that.
Happy to do that for you.
And may I just say I agree with you on that, Mr. Chairman. We certainly are working with Caltrain to make sure that we don't end up with pancaked sequential investments. We want to do this right the first time.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Mr. Richard, a lot of new discussions about the blended approach. With Caltrain now and Metrolink to the south in LA, so you now have changes on the northern and southern ends of the high-speed rail line. What will the average train speed be with the current number of stops that are proposed be between San Francisco and Los Angeles? Average train speed.
I would say I'll have to do the division in my head, but the system, as you know, Mr. Chairman, has to be designed so that a nonstop train can go in 2 hours and 40 minutes, and we're still meeting that standard. In fact, the peer review group thought that we're about 8 minutes ahead of that. In a way, the answer to your question is going to depend on the operator. Again, we are going to turn this over to private sector operations. They're going to make decisions about how many through trains, which trains stop in which areas, and so forth. Those will be commercially driven. But I would say, in general, if I had to guess today, it would be about 3 hours from LA to San Francisco with normal stops, but with through trains at the 2 hours and 40 minutes that the statute calls for.
So there will be some trains that skip a certain amount of stops to be able to hit the 2.4 hours.
The requirement in the law is that the system be designed so that a nonstop train can go in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Just as the airlines optimize their service, which things they do nonstop, which ones they go through hubs, the private sector operator will come in and they will look at the ridership numbers and they will decide how they want to provide service to those cities. Some of it will clearly be nonstop. Some of them will stop in San Jose, maybe make limited stops. Some of them will stop in all the cities. And we will certainly want to make sure that everybody gets served, and I think the markets are there to serve them. But the reason that I can't give you a full answer today is whatever I say would be superseded by the commercial decisions, probably within some limits, that the commercial private sector operator would make about how to optimize the system the best.
We've seen a number of models as we've taken a look at France and Japan and China and seen what projects there are that are high speed that are already out there. We've also seen Florida and Texas, they're modeling on what is proposed in the future. I would like to also see that modeling for California to better understand what areas of the state you could actually hit the 220 miles per hour, and if you're adding in stops and optimizing the rail system based on those stops, we would like to see how that affects the 220 miles an hour.
We'll be happy to provide that to you. I would only make this point very quickly, Mr. Chairman, which is several times you've referenced the legislatively created peer review group. One of the things, before we agreed to the blended service, the peer review group not only recommended it, but indicated that we could run blended service in the end portions and still meet all the requirements of the Bond Act. 85% of the track we're laying will be brand new virgin track, and that will all be susceptible to the highest speeds that these trains can run on, subject only to track geometry. It's only in the urban areas where, as you've traveled around and seen it, the trains don't go 200 miles an hour anyway. That's why we were able to share track in the north, and in the south, we're only sharing corridor. We're building our own track, but adjacent in the corridor with no appreciable impact on the speeds.
Thank you. And I want to follow up on one final question, Mr. Richard. From a previous hearing that we had last year, last July, California High-Speed Rail Authority made a presentation to the U.S. DOT in which it indicated it would seek $15 billion in federal funding and financing support. Where does this stand, and why was this not discussed in the 2016 business plan?
I was not in that particular interaction with the DOT. My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that, and I have to search my memory on this, is that basically it was a conversation about possible access to RIF funding and other sources like that. I don't believe it ever, well, I know because it never came to our board, it never rose to the level of a proposal. I think that it was a conversation with DOT. We've had an excellent partnership with our funding partners there about, as we moved forward, the ability to, if you will, securitize our revenue streams with RIF loans and so forth. I don't think it progressed past that at that point. We'd like to come back to that at the appropriate point. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll permit me, at some stage I'd like to work with you and your staff on our long-term view about how we're staging this and what support we might be looking for at various junctures.
I look forward to that continued discussion, but as chair of California High-Speed Rail Authority, certainly you must authorize or at least know of any of your staff that may be going out and giving a formal presentation, especially one that would require $15 billion.
That would be correct, sir, but I don't think that this was a formal presentation. But again, I'm going to go back and take a look at it. I mean, I remember at the time, I did not authorize it, and I'd like to say that I know every single thing.
I would love to go over that with you.
Okay.
It looks, from our standpoint, that we got it after the fact, that it looks like a very formal presentation. I guess my bigger concern is that while this happened in July, we had a hearing in San Francisco or in the Bay Area on August 29th.
That's right.
Where you had indicated there would not be any federal funding needed, both from questions from Republicans and Democrats, that there would not be any more funding needed under the initial operating segment. So you can understand how we would be concerned to see that a month prior, $15 billion is being requested out of DOT.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me just say I take my obligation to give full and candid testimony very seriously. And what I said is exactly what I meant. For our initial operating segment, which is about a $20 billion segment, my belief right now is that it would be, I mean, I'd love to take federal money, but my belief right now is it will be funded with $8 billion of state bonds, the $3.5 billion of federal money we already have from ARA, the Stimulus Act, and the FY10 appropriation, from a combination of cap and trade dollars, and then we have a gap of a couple billion we have to fill. But we have a financing plan in mind for that that does not involve us coming and asking for any additional amount of federal money. So my statement to you on August 29th stands, and I'm happy to go back and rectify that with this other presentation. But my statement to you stands on that. We were not looking for $15 billion to get the initial operating segment done. And again, I think it goes to the nature of, as Mr. Reniger was responding to a different question, a RIF loan that is a payback of federal dollars is certainly not the same as a federal grant. And so, but again, I don't have that presentation in front of me or in mind, Mr. Chairman. I understand very seriously the concern you're raising, and I'll be happy to follow up with you in the committee on it.
The concern is to make sure we have an open and transparent process and that
Yes,
we actually adhere to the will of the voters. So my concern was both on Caltrain as well as finding out this. We want to make sure that it is a transparent model, that you should be having a discussion with us. So when we find a grant agreement that comes up only a couple of days before the administration leaves, or when we find that there was a presentation that was presented to the U.S. DOT a month before we had a hearing and we were not privy to that transparent document, it obviously raises questions. So we'd like to see a little more transparency. I'm looking forward to not only our sit down to go through some of these items as well as the items that we're requesting in writing, but also, again, taking up Mr. Costa's offer and invitation that we actually take a look at some of the jobs that are being created in the Central Valley. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to it.